Welcome to the CANIE Climate Dialogues, the podcast at the intersection of international education and climate action. I'm CJ Tremblay, and today will be the first in our hopefully many episodes on institutional perspectives. For our inaugural show of institutional perspectives, we will be chatting with the Director of International Relations and Associate Professor at the Strasbourg Business School, Kevin Mac Gabhann, to find out more about what actions on international mobility the business school does to improve sustainability when students go on international exchanges. The people who listen to this podcast and people that we talk to at various events are always asking us, what are some practical things we can do on mobility? What can we do to make mobility more sustainable? What actions can we take? So this is an important conversation to have because we need to share knowledge with each other and continue the conversation around how we can do better with the programs that we already have. Today is super fun also because we are joined by a new CANIE co-host, Michelle Avelena, who has been helping out behind the scenes with this podcast. So while she is new to you, she is not new to the podcast. Fun fact, Michelle is also my coworker at my day job, and we get to work together every day, all the time, and it's a treat. Michelle is currently the manager of Test Center Operations at Paragon Testing Enterprises, where we work together. Michelle got into the field as she was once an international student herself and believed in the power of the international education and mobility. And you're going to hear a lot more from her about that. She completed her bachelor's degree in architectural environment engineering at the University of Nottingham, where she had the opportunity to study in both its China and UK campuses. And she also has an MBA from the Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. She's completed several sustainability projects during her master's and after graduation, including a renewable energy project with the IKEA Group and a sustainability partnership framework project at Cambridge Assessment. Very, very cool. Michelle, my friend, my colleague, my sister in sustainability, welcome to your first CANIE Climate Dialogues episode in front of the camera and in front of the microphone. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm very excited to actually be in front of the camera. I'm usually the one typing behind the scenes.
Yeah, this is really great. I mean, I know we saw each other 2 hours ago for work. We are, spoiler to everyone, we are actually recording this after we recorded the interview with Kevin, but it is very exciting to have you here.
Thank you so much.
As how I feel about you. It's a pleasure and joy to work with you at Paragon and at CANIE. But for the people who are meeting you and hearing you for the first time, please tell our listeners about you and your story.
Sure. I'm originally from Indonesia. I was born and raised in there, and I'm one of the very lucky people that could study overseas. When I was 17, I moved to China to do my degree in architectural environment engineering, and then I moved to the UK as a part of the 2+2 program. So I guess my journey with sustainability kind of started from there. The 4 years degree really focused a lot on sustainability. How do we make green buildings? How do we change existing building and make it into a passive, a greener and more sustainable building. Even though I did that, I actually work in international education. It's a passion of mine. I feel like my life was changed after all the education that I got internationally, and I've been working in that field forever, I feel.
Perfect. So thank you for that. One of the things that I know I'm putting you a bit on the spot here, but one of the things that you've shared with me in a number of conversations about this journey we're going on, I know you've been there alongside me for this as I learn and continue to learn, and you got more involved. But you shared on a number of occasions that you felt like your degree was almost ahead of its time.
Yeah, that's super right. I graduated at a time where, I did come back home after the UK, and there was not a lot of opportunity or awareness in sustainability, in green building. In fact, when I graduated was sort of the boom of commodities. So like mining and all of that were more prominent. People don't really think about it back then, about 10 years ago, but the world has changed.
Yeah. And so I'm so interested in, what it was that has made you hopeful as you sort of reconnect with what you had learned in your sort of formative education in your bachelor's and beyond.
Yeah, I think there's always a part of me as I work in international education that still thinks about sustainability and the importance of it. I think, honestly, climate change, sustainability, they're just a part of your life and a part of who we are as humans. So I can't really separate that away from me. Um, and as I did a couple of projects in sustainability out of personal interest during my master's, and really my kind of like my re-entrance to this is when I actually started talking to you about CANIE, and when you started volunteering and you started becoming really active and on the board and all the work that you did, I was like, wow, there's really an intersection in the industry that I am passionate about, that I'm currently working in, and something that kind of came back from my past that's always on the back of my mind. Like, I want to do something about it, but I don't know how. I don't know where to start. So really connecting with you on that really gave me that opportunity to find that, really, that intersection. It's such a good, good term for it, that intersection between international education and sustainability.
And we've talked, we recently had an event on climate justice, and we recently, are exploring that intersection, not just of climate action and international education, but also that sort of third dimension, that intersection of climate justice, sort of that lens on top of that as well. And I'm wondering if if you're able to sort of share your perspective about how that connects to your experience, sort of coming from Indonesia, and sort of what you learn and how that's been a part of your journey.
Oh, for sure. As an Indonesian, you know full well about the wealth of natural resources that the country has, but also at the same time, the wealth of biodiversity. And the fact that at one point, Indonesia was one of the largest, has one of the largest forests in the world. And you see how the things really change really fast. Borneo, for example, is now very famous for coal mining, or like any other types of mining. And and you kind of start thinking about, does all this mining help the actual like the people that live there, the communities that are based in Indonesia, the indigenous people in Indonesia as well? Um, and and the answer is no. Some might benefit from it, but a lot of people, the farmers, for example, because the disruption in biodiversity also means that a lot of the animals died, or a lot of the animals they lost a space. They actually start attacking the farms, and all these really sad stories that you hear. Um, and being at the equator as well, at in that line, we feel the impact of climate change, the crazy flood that the city where I'm from experiences on a yearly basis. In fact, it's currently happening as we speak. There's a big flood that is expected to come to Jakarta, and so the impact is so real, and the awareness is still very lacking in a place where the economy is growing, or it's a developing country. You do feel that um, that you wish people would understand and see a little bit more about the impact, and not just a short-term monetary gains out of uh, doing things mindlessly.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of yourself with everyone who's listening. I am always so grateful for everything that you share with me. So I am so happy for our listeners to get to know you more. I am without question comfortable saying that, all of your experience and your passion, CANIE is better off for it. And so I'm very excited to go into this interview for listeners to hear the interview with Kevin. It was really great. But before we go into that, breaking news, very exciting update for our listeners. I'm super excited for this. The CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast has a presenting sponsor. How cool is it that we have a presenting sponsor?
Yay, super exciting.
So as an avid podcast listener myself, I feel like this is how I know we've made it. I know you listeners have heard me say a couple times, how fun is it that people listen? How cool is it that people listen? It's still cool and that's wild, but we have a podcast presenting sponsor. So without further ado, sort of my first official ad read, and our presenting sponsor is the University of Auckland's International Office. So you might have seen, I think a couple episodes ago, we put their logo up on our climate icon, or sort of our podcast icon, but the University of Auckland's International Office. This is the first time we're recording a podcast where we've got sort of all that information. So we are super excited. The University of Auckland's International Office is super proud to sponsor the CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast series. New Zealand is a unique place to think about climate through the lens of their Indigenous cultures. Leading the world's universities in the Times Higher Ed Global Impact Rankings, as they work towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the international team at the University of Auckland share you, our listeners, concerns about climate action and the international education. The University of Auckland is answering the world's call. So I'm super looking forward to sharing really cool stuff that University of Auckland's International Office is getting up to. They do a lot of really great things. We've had a lot of really interesting conversations and figuring out the kind of information that you listeners want to hear. They have incredible faculty who are sharing their knowledge, not just about international education and climate change and that intersection in operations, but also just some science and some stories and some history. So there's really a lot of really cool content coming that we're excited to share with you as part of this. So a big thank you to our friends at the University of Auckland's International Office. Thanks to them, our podcast is going to be able to grow and be sustained. And so as an added bonus, the fact that I get to read ads is something that I kind of love. And so here we are, first official sponsor segment in the books. And now, thank you for staying with us. This is very exciting. Happy to have Kevin with us. Kevin is a business professor at HR management, the director of international, the associate professor at Strasbourg Business School. He is also a CANIE founding member. Very cool. And Strasbourg is the only school in Europe who requires master's students to do a full year of exchange. So Kevin and his team work very closely and have a deep passion for sustainability. And there's some really practical stuff that we're going to learn from him. He has almost 20 years of experience in sort of academics and senior management in international and higher ed. Born and raised in Dublin, he began his international career in the US, spent some time in Japan, and wound up in Strasbourg in 2000. So this is going to be a really great one. Thank you for listening, and we'll play that interview with Kevin. Kevin, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Hi, CJ. Hi, Michelle. How are you? It's great. I'm delighted to be here today on this Climate Dialogues podcast, my first ever podcast. So it's new for me, and I'm delighted. And by the way, congratulations. This podcast is certainly, it's an added value to the whole CANIE project, and very relevant of its time. And bravo, kudos to you both. Bridging climate action issues in international higher education by bending people's ears is as good as any method. So great, I'm enjoying it. I've enjoyed the past podcasts.
Oh.
Nice to be.
Well, thank you. If I'm really happy if you're one of our listeners, that makes me very happy. Good to know. So where are you joining from today, sir?
Yeah, sorry, I'm in Strasbourg. I'm just north of Strasbourg. So I'm in Strasbourg, France, capital of Europe, Strasbourg, since 1949. And I'm actually not at my school today at the university. I'm in my home, which is about 40 kilometers north of Strasbourg. A very snowy day today. I just came back from a walk in the Vosges Mountains during my lunch break. And I'm happy to report that it's good weather, blue skies. And so we're at the end of our evening. You're in the morning there, early morning, right?
Yeah, Michelle and I are joining from Vancouver today. We're optimistic about the quality of the sun today. It's not every day in the winter that you get a lot of sun, but we're hopeful today.
Blue sky.
The early bird catches the worm.
Is that, yeah, Michelle and I are definitely late sort of night owls, but this is, I will definitely, I'm happy to be awake at this time to chat with you for sure. I know Michelle and I are both ex-business school students, so we're super excited to be talking about mobility. We both had the benefits of studying and doing projects in many, many different countries. And that said, I've said this before on the podcast, I sometimes am sort of feeling the remorse or, guilt about the carbon footprint of my MBA experience. I hadn't been I was not as climate conscious. I had a global executive MBA that was traveled many, many, many countries. And I sort of face that a lot and feel like I'm going to be making up for it for a long, long time. So, it was just these incredible experiences, but having to face the truth, right? That the mobility aspects of these transformative, valuable education experiences have a really high carbon footprint as we fly around the world and learn about cross-cultural business practice, interpersonal dynamics. But we know that part of the truth and believe that part of the truth means looking about facing that and what we have the power to change. So I'm really excited to have that discussion on like existing programs and sort of hearing what you're doing. But first, we're really keen to sort of have our listeners hear your climate story.
Ooh, my climate story. Interesting. Yeah, I suppose, well, first of all, you can probably untangle it from my accent. I am at French, even though I'm at the French Business School, EM Strasbourg Business School, which is the business school of the University of Strasbourg. But I'm Irish and I come from Dublin, born and reared. And I left Ireland at 18. I went to the United States. I did my undergraduate in the States on a sports scholarship. And then went from there into the Up With People program, a very international program out of Denver, Colorado. I was sponsored by Heinz Foods out of Pittsburgh. And it was essentially an international program where you live with 150 people and travel the world. And that was my first exposure into intercultural and mobility, etc. And then I went to Japan. I worked in Japan in expatriation training for a period of time, and then returned back to where I came from, Ireland, to a very diverse and new Ireland, an economically wealthy Ireland. Repatriated and did my own, like yourself, business, master's level business, and then worked for a couple of years and then came to France. And I'm in France for the last 20 years. The reason I came, before you ask me, as everybody does, is because my wife is French and I met her back in the old college days. And henceforth I came to France, and I've been in France since. Now, as my role today, talking to you, I'm the Director of International Relations at the Business School here in Strasbourg, the University of Strasbourg. And I'm also a faculty member. My field is international human resource management, intercultural management, diversity management. And then I'm also the Director General of the Hermes Network, which is a university network about 20 plus years old, which consists of 26 universities across the world. And again, my field, my background, in essence, is intercultural. I'm a fellow of the Summer Institute of Intercultural Communication out of Portland, Oregon, a practitioner, etc. So that's where my heart is in terms of mobility and sending students abroad. So I'm privileged to have that job. I suppose I should tell you a little bit now at this stage of the institution that I work for. So EM Strasbourg Business School is, as I said, the business school of the university. University is 50,000 students, but we're the business school, about 3,500 students. And we, international and mobility is very, very much in the DNA of what we do at the business school. And I mean that very sincerely. Why? Because first of all, our location coming out of Strasbourg, one of the capital cities of Europe, with Brussels and Luxembourg, but Strasbourg, so our geographical location, we're on the border of Germany, a 200-kilometer border. So there's a lot of historical cross-border relations. Being in the capital, Strasbourg is also the capital of Europe, so that's the European Parliament and the European institutions, the Council of Europe, so it's international by nature. And then, of course, the university goes back to the 16th century, and it has been sending scholars across since going back to those days. The business school is unique, or it's our distinction is that we're one of the few schools, certainly in France, and I would say across Europe, and hazard to say across the world, that has a policy of obliging all of our master level students from our program Grande École, which is our big program, to go abroad, not for a week or for a month or for a semester, but for an entire year. So just to give you an overview of that, that means my office sends out essentially 450 students for one-year exchanges every year on a reciprocal basis. So therefore, we're bringing in a lot of international students on that basis. And then, of course, we've got field study, short-term programs and summer schools. So all in all, it's high volume numbers of in and out mobility. And again, it's part of our mission of the school, agile managers, global citizens. These are key words in our mission. It's very much a part of what we do. And we've been doing exchange and mobility at our school since the beginning of Erasmus, which goes back now 30 plus years, 1987. And we've certainly been on board hardcore with it. So to put things into context, yeah, I'm privileged to have this job. I'm privileged to be part of an institution that values international as it does. And it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of that. You mentioned transformative earlier on. It is very transformative, the work we're in. And yeah, so that's just to give you a context of where I'm coming from and what I'm doing.
So that's really cool, right? Because you've been doing this for a long, long time, as you mentioned, and with sort of international at the core. So I'd be curious to know how you made the connection, or when you made the connection to sort of sustainability and the carbon impact of what you're doing, and how you came to be involved with CANIE.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, let me state from the outset that our business school, we have a sustainable department, and we've been on board with sustainability for quite a long time. Several years, a decade at least, and it could be more. Where I came on board in this topic was really from a personal perspective, because like you, in my job, I travel a week, a month over a 9-month period. So I do a lot of binge traveling and traveling a lot across the world in this job, negotiating partnerships. By the way, given those numbers, I've got 240 partners across the world in 52 countries that we built up that network. So I do a lot of traveling and attending the conferences. So it came to a stage where I had to ask the difficult question at myself at a personal level, first of all, in terms of my carbon footprint, but of course for the students going out. And, you know, as we all today have to ask the difficult questions, I wanted to get out and say, okay, how can we put in place systems and policies to address this issue? Like everybody else, Greta Thunberg effect, she shook my tree, telling us that we're on the 6th extinction of animals, or global warming. All the indicators and the science is there, and carbon emissions, and of course, mobility is probably the biggest carbon emitter or carbon dioxide emitter in any business school, and certainly in ours with our numbers. So to get back to your answer. Back to your question, excuse me. I went, as I say, I go to all the international conferences in higher education throughout the year. I went around looking. There wasn't a lot of information on. There's lots of information on sustainability, but not on climate action and mobility. And this is going back now about 2017, 2018. I was going to these conferences, NAFSA, API, EAIE, and I wasn't seeing a lot on this topic, to be quite frank, until I was fortunate enough to be in Singapore where I attended the API conference at the time. I think it was 2018. And who did I bump into? Only the great Alyssa Lamont, who was doing, or sorry, Elsa. She always corrects me. I always have to correct her. Elsa Lamont. And I attended a session that wasn't the only session I saw ever. It was my first time seeing a session that was based on this topic. I attended it. I was shocked that there wasn't a lot of people at this. Why weren't other people asking that question in international higher education? I was fortunate to have met then Elsa afterwards. We got talking, we connected. I found her, she was a game changer in the road as far as I was concerned, because I finally kind of met someone who had the same thoughts and the same, she resonated to what I wanted to get informed about. So we stayed in contact, and basically 2000, that was March 2018, I attended an EAIE conference that same year in Geneva. And again, didn't see a lot, except I came across a poster on the greening of comprehensive internationalization strategies by a gentleman by the name of Scott Blair, who you know, I'm sure, and he lives here in Paris. And honestly, that was another connection. And because Scott is in Paris and Elsa is in Melbourne, Australia, I was organizing a steering committee, an advisory committee for the international relations in our school, which we do every 2 years. And I decided I to invite Scott down to talk to our management and our faculty and our business contacts about this topic. And so that was the sort of second step. If you bear with me, the road is a little bit long here, just bear with me. After that, that was 2018. 2019, I attended the British Council. Myself and Elsa I presented it, but collaboration with Elsa, a poster on the subject at the Berlin conference for the British Council. And over time, I got a working committee going in my own office. I have a brilliant team in my international relations office, and several of them were very motivated on this topic. So we got a working group going on green and how we could devise a policy. So we were gathering information, etc., using Elsa's contacts and Scott's. And then I was invited to participate with Elsa and Scott at the EAIE conference in, where were we? Finland in 2019.
That you can keep track of all of these places is remarkable.
Well, I don't know how I can, because I go to so many of them. But just to finish on that, for me, that was the first time I ever saw I bumped into a real presentation and a full dedicated session on this topic. And it was with Elsa, myself, there was Petula was there too, and a couple of others. And that after that really was the launch of the CANIE project, which was really led by, in my opinion, Petula and Elsa as the great founders. I'm by no means an expert in this field, but I was lucky enough to be at the right time to connect in. And like I say, they've been game changers for me. And the CANIE project is exactly, it's a perfect association for someone like me who's not an expert, who wants to go and get that information and exchange with an alliance of people who have the same, like minds, who have the same interests. And that's really where I came to it. So henceforth, I'm involved in CANIE. I attend the meetings and the great summits that we've had, and I look forward to the future.
Thank you so much for sharing your climate story. What I love about asking this question, and what I love specifically about yours, is that it kind of just came out of conversation. And to your point, when you talk about you were looking for information, you talked to people and you reached out to people that you thought might be, that, you know, I did the same thing. I just sort of inserted myself and introduced myself to Elsa, where you just kind of were reaching out and asking for help or asking for information. And I think that you are one of the founding members and to your point, and like mine as well, where like we weren't experts, but in the climate science, climate change, climate action field, but we are still able to sort of take action and make changes within our institutions. And I think that that's the whole point of CANIE. And so whoever is listening and wherever this finds you, there's always sort of something that you can do. There's always an action you can take, whether it's reaching out to someone, having a conversation, and you just don't know what can come of this. And so some of those, you know, that presentation that you're talking about with you, Petulia, Scott, and Elsa, that was really kind of the start of something. And that's really powerful. And so thank you for sharing that.
You're very well. Just so you know, I was focusing on the student mobility piece there. So that's where, of course, linked to what I do at my school.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that's great.
So Kevin, building on that action part, we know that you have an international mobility green policy at your business school. Can you tell us a little bit on why you started the initiative and what are they?
Yeah, well, the why, I suppose it kind of speaks for itself in the sense that, the science is giving us all the facts and figures today, Michelle. Mobility is a polluter. Higher education and mobility, I forget the statistics, 14 megatons of pollution, or between 14, I've read different statistics, up to 39 megatons a year comes from just international higher education and mobility. So we play a part into that. And of course, we've got to get urgent about this now. We can no longer be complacent. They're telling us that by mid-century, 2050, the runway is running out here. Time is against us. We've got to get not just active, but we've got to be rapid in our actions, or even, dare I say, radical in our actions. But we've only got to look at sea levels and ice melting, and we're off track with our carbon footprints and our global warmings. The list goes on. So the time has come. Essentially, we got to deal with carbon footprint, and essentially our school, like so many other schools in international education, while it is a diamond in what we do and it's the jewel in our crown of management education, as far as I'm concerned, we do now have to address the hard issue and tackle and essentially go for, dare I say, zero net or net zero emissions as soon as we can. So that's the why. I would also add on the why, Michelle, I believe that a manager, I'm coming from a business school, so I'm talking in terms of management. A young manager, 21st century, has to have the technical skills and functional skills of management, but in addition has to have the intercultural competency skills to be able to work across borders in a global world, to be able to negotiate, lead, manage, control, plan, etc., and essentially build relationships. Build relationships with people who are diametrically opposed in their behaviors, their attitudes, their norms, their values. That is the challenges today. And from a business perspective, from a strategic perspective, whether it's top line, building joint ventures, strategic alliances, partnerships, etc., we need managers who have the skills to build those relationships, to negotiate, to lead and manage.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the reason I'm saying that is that's the mobility piece, but we've got to look at it in today's context and the future. Being technically and functionally skilled is one thing, and being interculturally competent is imperative, in my opinion, to hit the ground running as a manager. However, the key, and I see it clearly, and it was kind of like an epiphany for me, myself, was we also have to look after the biggest stakeholder of all. I speak in a business context, but are the biggest relationship of all, which is, of course, Mother Nature, which is the planet. And you've only got to put on your Netflix these days and watch David Attenborough's Our Planet, or go back to DiCaprio's Before the Flood, or Melanie Laurent here in France and her Tomorrow program, and the list goes on, to see the beauty of this planet and how fragile it is and how interconnected it is. So my point is that the why is that we have to now train managers going forward, not just to be interculturally competent with global perspectives, to be effective in this world, but also to be able to be eco-responsible, eco-literate, in order to be effective and efficient with the most important relationship of all, planet Earth. And quite frankly, I haven't done it in the past. And I don't think the higher education system hasn't done it in the past. And we've been promoting international mobility all our lives, and we stand over it, and I certainly stand over it, and I will fight for it. But we have to put in now this new skill set, if you want to call it that, which is eco-literate. We want managers today to be able to have quality relationships of trust and meaning with the planet, with nature. And I think that's why. So what did we do? We put in a policy. And now let me be clear about this, okay? I'm here today. I've been invited on today to talk essentially about the policy that we rolled out. This is a simple policy, okay? We're in a COVID climate change, and these are challenging times, and priorities are on just keeping mobility alive and ticking over and looking after students all over. this is a simple 5-step plan that we put in place. It's a starting point, and it's a starting point in a challenging time. Our goal, or the way I see it, over the next decade, is going to be the key issue. Not just in education, but in finance, society, right across the world, at universities, at finance, banks, the world, the society. And in the education field space, we've got to get that right. And I'm not here to talk about what we do at the university level on sustainability or our own business school. I'm just talking and focusing in on the area of mobility. And that's why I said, okay, we're not going to wait post-COVID. We're going to push through this and put out, if it's a basic starting point, let's get it up and running. And I will just say, Michelle, my own instinct of working with colleagues in CANIE and colleagues, of course, and my counterparts across the world is, I think we've all, and CANIE has hit that need, we all want to start. We all believe in this, but we don't know where to get started. And that's what's great about CANIE, by the way, because it's exploded in this last year, because it's a go-to place where you meet wonderful people who are there to help, as was Elsa for me. And all I want to say is that, yeah, it's been really important for us to get this 5-step plan. And I'll explain it to you when you ask, but it's a starting point, and that's the key point.
So that's really interesting about the 5-step plan. And you also mentioned that a lot of schools want to get started, but they don't know how. Can you tell us a little bit of the process of how you actually started this 5-step plans at your school?
Well, okay, it started again with conversations, as I mentioned before, going back to 2018, looking around. Like I say, there was nothing off the shelf. There was very little in the academic space, even in the research space. So again, it was through conversations and connections, etc. And then looking at our own school and our own context and our own cultural context to sort of fit it to the needs of our school. And it's all about timing, and implementing. There's barriers and challenges that, based on context that every school has to deal with. But the process was essentially, like I say, I brought together a group of very motivated team members on my team in the International Relations Office, who all like you and I, like every one of us here, are committed to mobility and international and the environment. And we sat down on a working group and took out a blank page and said, what are we going to do to get this started and keep it simple at the beginning, but get it started so we can build it. So that 5-step plan, basically, we started off with simple things. The orientation of our students, we said, let's talk about this plan to them. Let's make sure that they know when it comes to mobility, we have a plan. We put it the 5 steps. Basically, it's broken down into the before leaving stage, okay? And basically, a very, very simple thing to do. The first step was to look at our 240 partners and to put in a rubric on our intranet system, so that when students go to look at the universities to learn about them, to make their choices to go abroad, that every school has a rubric which indicates the carbon footprint of going by plane, by train, or by car, depending on the circumstance. Just that in itself was revolutionary, because it meant that students examined their choices. In our school, they got choices to go abroad, and that gave an indicator of the carbon footprint. So that was step 1. Shall I continue? Step 2, or?
Yes, please. We really want to hear all about it.
Okay, step 2 then, and again, I emphasize the word simplicity, okay, to start off, to put some shape on it. Second thing we did was we organized a compulsory mandatory conference with over 500 students who came. It was online, of course, because of COVID. And we invited an expert in the field. And of course, who was the expert in the field? It was, of course, Elsa Lemon, who came in. And that was an opportunity to expose this topic to the students, to really discuss the impact that mobility has on climate change, but also to address what is eco-literacy, what is eco-responsible, what does it look like? And of course, some of the climate action issues and climate justice issues about global warming and the science, etc. And then, of course, we used that as a sort of a launching pad for our policy, and we introduced, to the student how to assess their carbon footprint and introduce them to websites and how to calculate it, etc. And giving them a whole load of ideas around, preparing to fly, travel, and how to eco travel and pick the right flights and direct flights and low carbon airlines, etc. And we also use that time to introduce our program and events for planting trees, which brings me on to the third point in our 3-step plan, which is actually setting up events to offset and help students offset their carbon footprint by essentially planting trees, taking students out in buses to go and plant trees with local associations in the Alsace region. And something actually we had started a year before in our bachelor's program. But of course, COVID is here and all of that has been put on hold. But at least it's up there, it's in the consciousness of the students, etc. And as soon as we can get back to continue it, we will. But also plugging and events to get that up and running. So that was the third point. The fourth point was actually when the students are on mobility, when they're abroad, that we give them a checklist for sustainable living abroad, how to live, sustainably, to join initiatives or green initiatives in the host countries that they go to. Remember, our students go throughout the world, literally from India to Australia to right beside us here in Germany. And I could give you a big long list of all the sort of tips and advice on, how to live and how to travel and how to live abroad in a sustainable way, public transport, what to eat, the 5 O's, etc. All of that, putting it in a checklist format. And then the last point in our plan was essentially to say, okay, when you're abroad students, we're going to recognize those of you who come back who've done projects or blogs or are able to come back to us with best practices from your study abroad, from your experiences abroad in the green space. And that's something now that we intend to do, is create that, not a competition, but a first prize, second prize, third prize scenario to get this ball rolling. But I emphasize it exists. We have a policy. We now have to muscle it up. And as we gather information to keep the momentum going. So that's our starting point.
Thank you for outlining that.
That's really, really cool. And, I love how you talk about the simplicity of it, because even though these are like simple steps, I'm really interested to hear how, getting these started at an institution is never simple. And, changing changing some of these longstanding, the way it's always been done can be a challenge. And so I'm really interested in how you navigate the complexity of getting these started, how you put these steps into place, and if some were more easy to implement than others, and sort of where you can take that initiative on yourself. And if in some cases you needed some, like a sort of advocate to move it forward, or how, and you talk about like punching it up and keeping it rolling, sort of what was needed to start, and what are some things that you're expecting to have to navigate to keep it going and build that momentum?
Okay, well, essentially, the challenges in getting it running, well, first of all, as I said, I have an international relations office team who are totally committed to this, and we're biting at the bit to make something happen on this. Not just the students, by the way, because in that 5-step plan, we also have this equivalent for incoming students, by the way. Okay, so it's not just outgoing students, but the incoming that we host the students. And then we also have a plan for our own office itself. In our office, we have to walk the walk, right? Or walk the talk, as we say. And in our office, we have a commitment to reducing our carbon, because all my colleagues will travel, to use more sustainable travel, and to have a paperless office. Even the gifts that we give to incoming students now are eco-friendly gifts. And then we also have created a logo. We also select partners, for new partners into the network. We assess the green aspects, etc. So just to give you a sense that there was a momentum behind, of a strong team behind me. And likewise at the management school itself, if I step back, we have a sustainable program that's been up and running in our school. It's built into curriculums. We have a very good online sustainable certificate program, a platform. There's a charter around sustainability, and it's inbuilt in our curriculums. And the colleague, one simple barrier was with the colleague who's responsible for sustainability left just before the pandemic. So there was the recruiting process, and somebody new comes in, that takes time, that slows down, getting to know the new person and exchanging and getting up to speed on that. Other aspects was, as I said, if I trace this back, the challenge number one is that there wasn't a lot of information out on this, okay? The challenge number two was COVID came along, and that meant all the priorities of the school were to manage and put out fires. And that was a major, as you all are aware, was a major, major stress, and still is, at the management school level, at the business school level, especially when we've got so many students abroad. And then also our priorities at the school were very much involved, the timing around accreditation, ASCSB accreditation or EPAS. We were working on a big AMBA project. So our priorities were at that stage, plus COVID. So the timing and staff changes. And then in my own office, we had staff changes. So you're going to have all these kind of environmental issues that you have to deal with. Just because you got the policy, it doesn't roll out just like that. And then I have to say too, from my own perspective, I'll be honest with you too. I was saying at the outset, well, is this my job? I'm the Director of International Relations. Does this fall on? I'm a busy guy. I teach, I travel, I run an office with 11 people. I've got 500 students going out and 700 coming in. I've got full field study schools, summer schools. Do I have to take on this as well? Do you understand what, isn't that like there was, So these were kind of learning and challenges, but when I did put together the project and rolled it out to the management, everybody went. I mean, nobody says no to a good idea. And full support from the management, my colleagues, the dean, etc. And of course from the sustainability office. So yeah, it's just, everything's about timing, and COVID slowed down things. Yeah. Does that answer your question, CJ?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I'd be keen to know, one of the things is moving it forward. You talked about building momentum. So I would say, what are you sort of leaning on and hoping for in terms of continuing to build it and not lose any momentum, particularly given that we're in kind of a challenging time with COVID, and particularly as that affects mobility, right? So what are you sort of hoping for, needing for momentum?
Yeah. Well, first of all, for COVID to go away, that would be a start. Okay. But if you can solve that problem for me, let me know. No, but in real terms, I mean, I'm laughing, but COVID is not a laughing matter. It's a public health issue. But actually, the biggest public health issue coming down the line could well be climate change, and it's coming fast. So to answer your question, yeah, sure. As I said, this is a starting point. Nothing is mandatory. Okay, we're tapping into the will of students. But you asked me before, one of the great, the students get this. Greta Thunberg said it herself. We're not asking for you adults to follow us, we're telling you to follow us. And students today, this is an intergenerational issue. This climate change, this is about, there are gaps, it's not the fault of the students today where we are with this. And there's a strong demand from the students for these things. So the students got on board. The students will get on board. We're confident of that. Now, they'll get out and plant trees en masse when the time comes, but they can't do it physically now because we're on lockdown here in France, or on semi-lockdown. But what I'd like to see happen over time, if I had a baguette magic and I could have what I wanted, I'd like to see these things, because remember, we're working in the context, CJ, as I see it at least, of zero net, or net zero. This is becoming a non-choice issue. So therefore, we have to aim for mobility going abroad. I will fight for it till the end. However, we have to do it in the most sustainable way possible. And if that means zero net, I would love for us to be in a situation to say, you can go abroad, but you have to offset, mandatory, a strategy that you must put in place to the student to offset that carbon footprint, okay, to get the zero net piece. So that's one thing I'd love to build on. A second thing to build on would be, more planting as much as possible, not just once or twice each semester, on a weekly basis, on a rotation basis, and that takes resources and time and budgets, etc. I would also say for the students when they go abroad, like think about it, they go all around the world. We've got students in Canada, for example, is that when they go abroad, that they get involved into green issues and local issues and environmental issues in the host countries, from India to Australia to Indonesia, etc. And I think there's a great opportunity there too to blend intercultural competence and eco-literacy, to bring them together and through the prism of mobility, learn about eco-responsibility. What better way with an international flavor? So I'd love to see every student, ideally down the road, having to sign up for some form of real hands-on eco activity on their study abroad. Another thing I'd love to see is a measurement. You know, I come from a business school, everything, but if it's not measured, it can't be managed, right? We manage intercultural competence at our school. We test students on intercultural competence. We use the different tools that are available, etc. Wouldn't it be great too to have some sort of a measurement of the eco-literacy of students as they go abroad in international? Because remember, my students don't go away for a week; they go away for a year, and you could measure that eco-literacy, etc. So these are some of the things that we like to do down the line, and I'm sure there's lots more, but I mean, we could talk all day about virtual exchange and COIL and bringing in when you talk about a policy going forward, is to use COIL, use virtual exchange in more meaningful ways, and diversifying our campus at home. And that's certainly something we want to do. I mentioned a podcast. I also want to create a brochure. In other words, I'm talking about checklists. I want to have a brochure of our school, of EM Strasbourg. Here's what we do. Every student gets the brochure on how to live sustainably abroad.
That's awesome. And, there's so much to unpack there, but I think the most important piece that you're taking the time to share with us is like that vision for mobility. And that's really great. And you mentioned COIL. So I'm going to do the thing where I say, dear listeners, if you haven't listened to our COIL episode, it's the one right before this one. Kevin, it's almost like I paid you to plug that previous episode. So that's great. I love the energy. We're both very much on the same page here.
Is it with Simone Hackett by any chance?
It is, of course, Simone and Keiko.
A fellow national.
Yeah. I was like, oh, two Irish accents for my ears. Just my favorite. This is great.
I'm not asking to river dance or sing river dance or anything like that.
Okay, so you mentioned a lot about the relationship with Mother Nature. There's so many different lenses of which we can talk about. You talk about just the relationship with Mother Nature. You talked about the intergenerational element of the climate action. Then there's we recently hosted a climate justice and international education summit. So there's that intersection of the Venn diagram of like climate change, climate justice, and education. And there's just been a lot of conversations where we need to sort of rethink the different models and the traditional models, right? The traditional diagram with the nested circles with you've got the environment is the base of it, and then social, and then business within that. So this is particularly interesting for business schools, right? Like I know that even a few years ago when I did my MBA, eco-literacy wasn't a part of it. Michelle, I don't know if that was part of it for you at all?
No, not really as well. It's definitely something I would love to learn back.
Yeah. And so it's just a few years ago, right? And so I'm really wondering if you can walk us through what it means to rethink sustainability specifically for like business schools. You've talked about it in terms of the literacy and the importance of management, but like, what does that look like for, the planet and how the mobility piece connects?
If you're asking me about the Venn diagram, immediately I'm thinking of 3 circles, and in one circle you've got climate action, and the other circle you've got climate justice. And by the way, the second conference is on the 23rd of February, right? The second part of
that's exactly right. 23rd February. You're great. You're hired.
I got the job. Yeah, and then also I would say then the third one is where I'm coming from, the education field. So where do I begin to answer your question? When it comes to climate action, I think we all know now that urgency, we have to act quickly. Time is running out, right? So that piece is very strong. There's 110 million tons of pollution put into the air every 24 hours, right? Animal species, we've talked about it, all those issues, and the science doesn't lie, and 99% of the scientists are behind that. We need to act. That's the emergency. Students should know about that, okay? The climate justice piece. and again, I'm by no means an expert in climate justice, but I do know that, this climate topic is unfair, the unfairness of climate change. Why? Because I mentioned intergenerational, it is intergenerational. It's not the younger people, the younger students coming through are living from our mistakes in my generation and past generations. So there is an inequality there, but of course there's an inequality around, third world countries that are not responsible for creating these carbon emissions, are very few. The G20 are responsible for 80% of carbon emissions. I could be wrong on that statistic. It's an old one, but broadly speaking, there's inequalities, and climate justice has to be a piece of the education for a young 21st century business school manager. And I would also say that the education. So climate change. You've got the climate justice circle, and then the last circle is education, and that's where business schools or universities come in. Hey, listen, don't forget one thing. It's a privilege to go to college. It's a privilege to go to university. On this planet, there's 7.5 billion. How many get to go to do an undergraduate, let alone a master's degree, or let alone a study abroad? I mean, the figures are minuscule. It's to have that opportunity to go to college and university is one thing. It's a privilege, and it is a cherry on the cake to have a year abroad. And as a manager, I would put it to you that as business schools, we have to make sure that those managers are, as I mentioned before, interculturally competent, to build relationships of trust and collaborate across the world from a global citizen perspective. And what is global citizenship? I mean, it's about essentially addressing the issues of the day. And those issues of the day today are migration, are refugees, are terrorism, are COVID, are AIDS, are cancer, and of course, climate change. And nobody can do this alone, or no country can do it alone, or no state can do it alone. We have to learn to collaborate. So we got to enforce the multicultural global mobility piece, but we also have to look at, as I mentioned, the eco-literacy piece. I wouldn't hire somebody into my team in the last decade if they didn't have intercultural competence and global perspective. I asked myself, would I hire somebody into the next decade if they didn't have eco-responsibility, if they didn't know how to manage the relationship with nature? And that is the responsibility of all of us, but certainly universities and certainly business schools. Why business schools? Because we're forming managers, and theoretically management is about leadership and leading back in communities, organizations, non-profits, universities. We're all formed through the education, and in our business school managers, these are guys and girls who will have responsibilities. They're going to be the leaders of the future. And the onus is on us to be able to muscle them up and educate them from the climate action piece, from the climate justice piece, and indeed from the education skills. And what are those skills? Those skills are, well, they're transferable for starters. The climate change is full of problems, right? I mean, we've learned that already from CANIE, from attending conferences. They're complex. What a great opportunity to learn complex problem-solving skills, These are lateral thinking skills. We can learn about empathy, working on teams, respect, trust, through the prism of the issues around climate change. And I think universities have a huge role to play in that. As I do from the business school, look, as far as I'm concerned, let's take it back to the net issue. We got to reduce our carbon emissions to net zero within the next 30 years. Or I'm saying 30 years, it's probably less. Banks, finance systems, listen in on Mark Carney's lectures on the BBC, the ex-governor, he's a Canadian, ex-governor of England, former governor of Canada, the banking system. And he talks brilliantly about how finance has to change today in order to address climate change, because we all know in the Western world, everything evolves around money and banking and loans. We've got to invest sustainably. And what I'm trying to say is, it's not just banking and finance, education has a role to do there too. We have to prepare our managers to hit the ground running, 21st century, to be effective and efficient with the biggest relationship of all, which is Mother Nature. And that starts, we've got a role to play, and we've got a great role to play in the international space. So that's a long-winded answer to a short question.
So that's, I guess that's the vision that you see, net carbon zero, and building managers and leaders that are eco-literate as well. I'm actually also curious about, you mentioned in the beginning that you have basic mobility policies that you created. In your kind of vision, what can the policy grow into? What do you want the policy to expand as we learn more about this and try to apply our learnings into our work?
Yeah, Michelle. Well, it's easy for me sitting here at my desk in Strasbourg or my home in Saverne to sort of say, oh, I'd like this and like that. It depends on, let's be real. We've been addressing this issue as a society for years, and we're still, as I understand, carbon emissions are still increasing despite everything, right? Mm-hmm. So let's be realist. It all depends on the context of the schools and universities that we live in. And schools and universities are like political systems in themselves. And therefore, we can't, we need radical change, but it's not easy to make radical change. So we have to keep chiseling away. What I would like to see, in an idealistic way to answer your question, is to go back to what the scientists are telling us. We need net zero. It's as simple as that, whether we like it or not. It's fascinating to see the amount of money that's been pumped into COVID to keep the economies afloat, and it's great. But one day we're going to have to perhaps do the same from the climate change perspective, and according to the scientists, they're saying it's within the next 30 years, mid-century. Hey, mid-century is only 30 years away. And what I'm saying is, what policies I'd love to see carbon net zero as a mandatory requirement. You cannot go abroad unless you come back with a net zero. We'll give you 3 years to do it. Go do it. Did you understand what I'm saying? And that goes not just for mobility. You could extend that right across campuses, right across businesses, right across our societies. But we got to bring it down to the sort of the meat and the potatoes here. And it's about net zero, ultimately. At least that's how I see it. And again, I'm not a scientist or a specialist in this field.
Kevin, I am you just this energy, and I feel so inspired. And I know a lot of mobility practitioners listening to this, I suspect, will feel the same. So thank you for sharing your passion, your journey, your vision for where we're going to go, and how mobility can continue to transform students, and specifically in a business school, sort of transform the way we manage the business and do business differently. So I guess I would ask for some final thoughts, words of wisdom for our listeners.
We can't self-isolate from climate change.
Wow.
We can self-isolate as we are, and you are probably in Vancouver today, and I am in Strasbourg, and my kids, my dogs, we're all indoors to deal, and hopefully COVID will pass. But this climate change is bigger than that. There's no mask we can wear, or no vaccine, as far as I know. And we've got to look at the urgency. We've got to increase the urgency and reduce the complacency. And it's about ultimately, go back to your Venn diagram. Where's the sweet spot in the middle? I say it's about values. We've got to put sustainability as a value. Go back to culture. Culture on the outside is about behaviors driven by values. We've got to put sustainability back into the value, the center of the onion, the cultural onion, because it'll drive the behavior. That sustainability has to be put in place right across our systems and our societies, including our universities and business schools. And I'd finally say that it's all about essentially love of people, intercultural common, and love of the planet. And my goodness, I came from my walk in the Vosges at lunchtime, and blue skies, birds everywhere, a deer ran across my route. I mean, these are things I didn't pay attention to a couple of months ago. So it's all to play for. So let's play on.
That's great. Feels like it was a scene out of the movie, you describing it. So thank you for sharing that with us. I love that. Cannot self-isolate from climate change. It is all about love and values, and valuing sustainability as a sort of a sector and culture and sort of civilization.
Yeah, and if there's no humans on the planet, there'll be no international higher education. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I say this all the time. It's not about, it's like the planet. She's resilient. She's been here for 1 billion years. She'll be here for 1 billion more. It's really about people-centric and making sure that there's a livable space for us to have an economy and have international business and have international education. So thank you, Kevin. This
My
was
pleasure. My
incredible and so wonderful.
Well, keep the good work up, and I look forward, any of you, to host you at EM Strasbourg Business School in Strasbourg. To all your listeners, you're all very welcome to visit us, and I look forward to meeting my international colleagues whenever we get to travel again, because I do hope we get to travel again, right?
Yeah, and it's just going to be a different mindset moving forward, right? Like all of these conversations, none of what we're doing is saying like, stay home forever. It's just really about doing it smarter, because I don't think that we were before. And we weren't realizing we didn't have all the information, or we weren't considering all the information. We were making those choices. Like, yes, I'm going to go here, but I am making that choice knowing this, and here's how I'm going to sort of make sure that the value is there for sort of people and the planet. So thank you again. This was wonderful. Michelle, thanks so much for being here. Now you and I are going to go work together for the day. Just hop from this podcast right into a meeting, I think. So this was just great. Thank you so much to the both of you.
Take the rest of the day off.
Thank you.
Noted. Thanks, Kevin.
Take care. I'll talk to you on the 23rd. I'll see you there.
Perfect.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
The CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast is engineered by Diego Mendez, who is based in Vancouver. He edits these episodes together, making us look and sound super professional. And also, he uploads these episodes to wherever you listen or watch this podcast.